Okay, so we're getting into our final section here on treatment procedures, and we're now just going to be talking about other procedures we should be considering. And so one of the things I want to talk about is why do we use two phases of treatment, or at least why do I use two phases of treatment? My simple answer is that I'm following the suggestions of Van Riper, sort of the grandfather of speech treatment who is in charge of traditional speech treatment, and he found that imitation in treatment is obviously going to be a little less complex than spontaneous production. That's your simple answer, right? Imitating is much easier to do than having to produce things on your own. The longer answer is that imitation tasks and your spontaneous production tasks involve different types of cognitive processing. So your imitation tasks or repetition tasks are going to involve speech perception, obviously because they're going to be listening to you, phonological encoding because they have to take what they're listening and basically store all those sounds together. And then not only store it, but they have to hold it in their phonological memory so they can then access it later. Then they have that phonological assembly where they take all those sounds that they've heard and then reassemble them into their own words. And then finally, there's the articulation, the motor aspect of producing those sounds. So on the other hand, spontaneous production involves even more cognitive processes. So usually it depends on what you're doing for spontaneous production, but for my speech or if I show them a picture, I'm like, what is this? They first have to visually perceive and recognize what it is that we're talking about. And then they had to come up with, they had to identify that and then identify some semantics about that, in terms of what is this? What do I know about this picture of a rake? I know this is something that I use to rake, to move leaves around. It's sort of heavy. It's sort of like a broom. They have all this semantic information. They had to access the lexicon, so they had to come up with the actual word for that item that they now know something about. Then you have to think about phonological form encoding. Again, they know the word, quote unquote, but then they have to think about the sounds that go into that word. And then they have to plan and execute how they're actually going to say those sounds that they've come up with that phonological form. Okay, so there's different things that are involved with spontaneous production versus repeating. And again, one of the biggest differences between our two types of tasks is that involvement of the semantic system during labeling. So again, we're thinking a labeling task. That is, they have to decide whether, they have to decide whether or not a lexical representation is accessed. Okay, so spontaneous production is going to require more cognitive effort and focus than simply imitating. Because imitating, they're just spitting, the air just goes in the ear, through the brain, and back out the mouth. Versus spontaneous production, they have to look at it, think about it, come up with a name, come up with what does this mean, and then think about the sounds and so on. So there's a whole lot more cognitive effort involved in spontaneously producing things. Again, specifically in terms of speech production, labeling a picture, so on and so forth. So another way to think about it is in terms of, at a neural level, imitation and spontaneous production are using different neural pathways in the brain. So your imitation task is probably involving the dorsal pathway, which is represented in blue. Where's my key? My dorsal pathway. Again, I was troubles thinking dorsal versus ventral. I was thinking dorsal fin on my dolphin or my shark is on the back, so that's the top. So dorsal on top. So your dorsal pathway maps sensory and phonological representations just onto articulatory motor representation. So that's your imitation. So they're just hearing it and they're mapping that what they've heard onto some sort of motor representation to say the sounds. On the other hand, your spontaneous production is involving the ventral pathway, which is represented here in pink. And so your ventral pathway is going to map the sensory and phonological representations first onto a lexical conceptual representation, which is then later linked to the articulatory motor representation. So we have sort of an extra stop, an extra point of thought process or cognitive effort when we're thinking about spontaneous productions rather than just an imitation task. And again, if you want to learn more about it, you can look at Greg Hickok and Greg Poppel. They have this, they call this the dual stream model of the anatomy of language. So you can look at that more if you're into that. Just want to give you just another way to think about imitation and spontaneous production. So again, just to sum up, we start with imitation and treatment to teach the kids the correct articulation of their sound and in their treatment words. Okay, but we move on to that spontaneous production phase so that the kids have to access all of the other lexical, semantic, and phonological information themselves without us helping them do it. Okay, so again, using that spontaneous production is going to lead to higher levels of learning and greater phonological change than treatment that involves only imitation. So please, we need imitation to build up that representation, but we need them to own it to be able to say it themselves with that spontaneous production. So together, that's how we're going to lead to greater phonological change, more generalization, more learning. Okay? Okay, so now we have some slides, again, taken from Carolyn Bowen, talking about a couple other treatment techniques that we should be using all the time for our speech kids, definitely our early language kids, or, just learning to speak and getting some language skills. So it's all about recasting. So we've talked a little bit about this in class before, I believe, but let's think about how, what is the correct way, so to speak, to recast. Right? So here's some thoughts here. So again, recasting is best done naturally as opportunities arise. So when the kid says something incorrect, we are going to recast it naturally. So I'm not going to just recast something they said last week. I'm going to take what is given to me here in the moment. So again, you want to be recasting topics that are interesting to the child. So again, I'm not going to recast myself saying things from correct to incorrect. Whatever the kiddo is talking about, that's what we are going to talk about too. And again, so not only are the topics interesting, these are things that the child has started. So again, he started the conversation about something, and then we're going to go with that. So here's our example. Daddy, I want a Superman tape. And Daddy's like, a Superman cape? You would do. Again, this could be for Halloween, whatever. But whatever the kid is talking about, that's what we're going to use as the basis for our recasting. Okay, and so again, we want to give that target word a little extra emphasis. I probably gave it more than we should have. So kids says, I want a Superman tape. And Dad's like, a Superman cape? You do? So again, giving it a little extra emphasis. So the idea here is if, kid says Superman tape and I would say Superman cape, shouting like that, that too much emphasis isn't going to help the kiddo. Okay? Because if we overemphasize the word, or saying it too loudly is going to distort and change how that word sounds. Because usually we don't go shouting, cape, cape, cape. That's not what we do. So we want it to sound like, what he would hear normally. And so we want it to be a proper model. So overemphasizing it or saying it too loudly is not the way we want to do recasting. And in the same way, overemphasizing a specific sound or saying that too loudly is also going to be changing how that sound, sounds and turns into a poor model. So this is where I think about like those word final stops. So we can go cape with a little extra emphasis on that P, maybe not too bad. But if we had that voiced sound, it's a cabe, with that emphasis on the B, so it goes from a cabe to cabe. We've added another sound, and it's not even the right word. So if he heard that somewhere else, if he heard cape somewhere else, he wouldn't understand it because that's not what he's been modeled. Okay, so we have to watch how we're overemphasizing those words and sounds a little bit to draw attention to it. But we don't want to be just obnoxious about it. Okay, and again, you also have to think about that. When you are modeling for the kid, the child does not have to imitate it. Our job. And the idea of recasting is for the child to hear that model. So at some point, he's gotten enough input, he's maybe ready to take an attempt at saying that word or that sound correctly. So we should not demand that they copy you. Cape, let's say cape. No, we're just modeling it. That's what happens in typical speech and communication. We just recast it and move on with things. We don't want to dwell on it forever and draw it out and beat it to death. Okay, and so we got something else. I'm just going to read this because it's sort of interesting. So again, the idea of the word frequent and frequent recasting means that we should be recasting 12 to 18 times within a minute for 3 to 4 minutes of the day, okay? So we want to hit it hard for a short period of time, a few times during the day. So, we say it for a minute here, a minute there, a minute a third time, and maybe a fourth time. But again, it doesn't mean that we're recasting like this constantly throughout the day. It would if you're a parent, this would drive your kids nuts. And obviously, if you do it too much, the fun's going to go out of it. The kid's like, oh my goodness, she's going on this rant about cape, cape, cape all the time. And it loses its effect. And I'll be honest, after a while, you would probably lose excitement about it too. So just a few little points in time, mass practice for a couple minutes here and there to draw their attention to it, and then just leave it be. Okay, so here's an example here. So kiddo says, Daddy, I want a Superman tape. And Dad's like, a Superman cape? You do? Cape, 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 cape. You can sort of make it fun. I like to make words and stories and songs up all the time. A Superman cape. Well, what color is Superman's cape? Is it blue cape or is it a red cape? Right, so you can have this little bit. Or does he have spots on his cape? Is it, is it a zebra cape? Oh, it's a red cape, right? So we need to make some red cape material. What's red? Do we have a sheet at home that we can make a cape out of? Do you want it to be a long cape or a short cape, right? And again, hopefully you're pausing so the child can answer these questions. You're not just talking to the wall. And again, you have to tell me how we should make this because I haven't made a cape before. It's been a long time before I made a cape, right? So hit it hard for a minute and then just leave it unless he keeps talking about it. You can talk a little bit more, but you don't want to do this every time he says a word because, oh my, you would never get anywhere with your conversation. The kids get impatient. They want to share something with you, but a little bit here and there I think is fine. Okay. And then our other thing besides recasting we do a lot of is modeling. They sort of go together, a lot of the same types of ideas. And we have, give you a couple examples of ineffective or poor models. Okay, and again, these are particularly ineffective for kids with speech disorders. Okay, so what do we got here? So pointless modeling, I sort of like this, pointless. All right, so the kid says, that's a big bird. And I'm like, no, not a big bird, a big bird. And so in this little moment, the kid says, that's a bid bird. And not a bid bird, a big bird. So what did the kid hear? He heard bid twice and big, the correct production, just once. And so basically the adult canceled himself out. He said bid and he said big. So the kid's like, which way is it, right? So what else we got? So the kid's like, oh, that's a bid bird. And I'm like, not a bid bird. You don't say bid bird. You have to remember to say big bird. And again, the child tunes out because, no, that's not right. You don't have to do that. That's not how we do it. So again, the kid heard bid 3 times, once from himself and twice from the adult, and just big once, even if he was even listening. Because after you say not a big bird, they're like, well, I'm a kid, adults know best, and so I'm just not going to say anything more and contribute because I'm not doing it right. All right, so think about what you're modeling. You want to say the correct word many more times than the incorrect word. Okay, so here's exaggerated modeling, which is also sort of obnoxious. So kids like, can I please have one? Can I have a cookie? And excuse me, he doesn't say please. I'm trying to do it right. Please, can I have one? And adults like, you mean please? Please, may I have one? And so the kid's like, yeah, whatever, just give me a cookie. All right, so that exaggerated modeling really doesn't work either. It distorts the sounds completely. It's like 2 whole separate words, puh and lees. And so again, this kiddo is not hearing the target correctly, right? So you say, please, can I have it? And make sure you're modeling correctly, no baby talk. You can maybe have a little bit more intonation or something on it, but nothing to over-exaggerate it. And, so here's one. So kid's like, he hurt his wag. And you're like, hurt his wag? What are you supposed to say? I hate this. What are you supposed to say? What words? Use your words. I hate this. And the kid's like, huh? I said it. He hurt his wag. And so again, you're not providing any model at all. You're just you're recasting what he said. And yes, we do a lot of recasting, but we try to recast an adult-like speech in terms of both speech as well as language. I'd probably also say he hurt his wag. He hurt his wag? Let's try to get he hurt his leg with an L, right? So again, we want to think about what we're saying to these kids. And here we got this one. So I want the wed one, please, right? Lots of kids say that. And then you say obnoxiously, you want which one, please? So you're still repeating the kiddo, so you think he's saying it correctly. Again, no speech model, and you're not providing models at all for the red, and you're copying them on the please. So no, let's not do that. We want adult-like productions. So, potentially okay modeling, but we want to be superstars because we're speech pathologists. So kids, again, that's a bid bird. And you can say it is a big bird. So it comes naturally to model this way. All right, and this is usually fine for our typical kids, right? The kids just need a one-time exposure to things. They're like, oh, it's not a bid, it's a big. All right, we can do that. But it's not powerful enough for kids who have speech disorders or language impairments. Again, these kids need so much input. They need 3, 4, 5 times the amount of input a typical kid gets. Okay, so we have to give them more models so they can copy it. So what do we got here? Here's some examples of effectively modeling, speech for the kids. Okay, so what do we got? So the kid's like, I like his punny face. Oh, he's a punny kid. All right, and so you can say, I like his funny face too. Did I say punny face or did I say punny face? Oh, anyway, I know I can just recast kids without even thinking about it. So I like his funny face too. It's a really funny face. A funny face. Do you know what that guy with a funny face is called? Right? So again, this is to point also what you're doing for kids who are just learning language. So just picking your target words again and again and again. And you have to pick your target. You have to pick, when you're modeling, how many times you want to say it so you don't drive the kids nuts. But think about what you're saying. Every word counts when you only have an hour with your kids, in treatment. Okay, so here the kiddo says, get it down. And we say, get what down? Oh, get this down? Okay, I'll get it for you, right? So I think I can reach. I can get it, right? So again, nothing too complex. It's not too obnoxious because you're just having short statements, but just keep repeating that word multiple times. That's the common denominator, so to speak, in all the words that you said. You got get across the board. And so then the kid might actually get it. And I guess that is the end of that. So hopefully you got that. Again, just some other things to think about when you're going to make lots of mistakes, but eventually when you're in treatment, especially if you're working with kids, you need to think about what you're saying, and hopefully those give you some ideas of good and bad ideas for modeling as well as for recasting. Alrighty, so that is the end of our treatment procedures section.